When Dragon Ball Z was first getting its English dub, it went through multiple alterations to try and tone down various aspects that people who worked on it felt were inappropriate for the intended child audience, which ranged from mild stuff like digitally removing some of the blood, to adding in throwaway lines suggesting that characters who very obviously died were actually still alive or got sent to an alternate dimension. Whilst this is a very clear-cut case of censorship, where part of an original work has been stripped out or in some way altered as part of an effort to make it fit in with the perceived standards of another audience, nowadays most people are able to look back on and laugh at these changes in hindsight, primarily thanks to the fact that most of these were undone in future airings of the episodes after the series' English dub was cancelled during its second season, before being revived thanks to reruns on Cartoon Network's Toonami block. In a similar vein, video game censorship can often be just as strange, with it sometimes having the knock-on effect to completely change the tone or impact of a scene, or in more drastic cases could even end up changing a game's lore and world in its entirety. The original artist's vision be damned. So how about you stay where you're at and don't do anything too provocative, as I showcase some of the weirdest censorship changes in video games. Now, it's fairly common for Japanese games to get altered for international markets, usually to alter sexual content that Western countries don't find acceptable. But that's not to say games don't get censored in Japan either. In fact, quite a few games made by Japanese studios have ended up being censored in their home country whilst remaining unaltered for the international release, which is usually done to remove over-the-top gore in horror games like the Resident Evil series. However, for the strangest change I could find, we need to look at Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, the only Metal Gear game for the PSP which is confirmed canon to the series timeline, and by extension, the only one the majority of people actually give a crap about. The censorship in question is in relation to a scene where Big Boss is being tortured via electrocution by Strangelove, who wants information about his deceased mentor, the Boss. Now, torture scenes were nothing new for Metal Gear. In fact, electric torture specifically had shown up at least twice before in both the original Metal Gear Solid and Snake Eater. Plus, given the typical mature rating the series goes for, this scene was completely fine in the international release. However, in the Japanese version, the sequence was altered so that instead of being electrocuted, Big Boss was being tickled. Specifically, the electric rods used by Strangelove are instead laughing rods that would send charges through his nerves to recreate the stimulation of being tickled. Her logic being that whilst Big Boss is likely used to withstanding pain, he hasn't had to deal with tickling before, potentially making him more susceptible to it. The reason behind these changes is due to the team trying to sell the game to a younger audience in Japan, specifically middle and high schoolers, due to it both being a game for a handheld as well as a desire to bring in new multi-generational fans, which was a type of fan growth previously being held back by the mature age ratings. So in order to keep the desired rating of a C, or 15, the scene had to be altered, else it'd be given an adult rating of either a D or Z, resulting in Boss's screams of pain being swapped out for uncontrollable laughter. Regardless of how you feel about the change, there's at least one thing I think we can all agree on. At least the laughing rods make more sense than whatever the hell was going on in the Metal Gear Acid games. Occasionally in the process of doing a remake or remaster, the people responsible can run into the odd bit that might be considered outdated and choose to remove it, which can range anywhere from the Yakuza 3 remaster getting rid of a quiz minigame with decade-old questions, to the Destroy All Humans 2 remake removing a mission revolving around a man wanting to get a sex change. The one I want to focus on though is the 2011 PSP port of Persona 2 Innocent Sin, and how it sort of of, but not really, attempted to obscure the identity of the game's penultimate boss, Adolf Hitler. To give some context for the people not expecting the Third Reich to show up, the general plot of Innocent Sin takes place in Sumeru City, a place cursed such that if any rumor is widespread and believed by enough people, it immediately becomes true, with one of the final rumors to become real in the story being that instead of killing himself at the end of World War II, Hitler not only survived, but also has been hiding in Antarctica with an army of 2 million ultra high-tech Nazi soldiers called the Last Battalion, who upon being made real, thanks to the rumors spreading, then invades Sumeru City and starts a war with the Masked Circle, a cult who serve as the main antagonistic force throughout the game, for control of an alien spaceship underneath the city called Xibalba. For the PSP remaster, whilst the story remains unchanged, Hitler's character portrait was altered slightly by having him wear a coat over his uniform and slightly obscured his face with sunglasses, along with the dialogue never actually calling him by his name, instead only referring to him by his title of Führer, with the floor of the room where you battle him also being changed, the original being a repeated pattern of red and black with swastikas. What makes this odd is that despite all these changes being made, it's still blatantly obvious that it's supposed to be Hitler, begging the question of why these alterations were even made in the first place, with the most widespread theory as to why this was done being due to Cero, the Japanese video game age rating board, apparently having a rule that you're not allowed to depict real historical figures in a fictional work, but I'm inclined to say that's not true, given Rasputin shows up in the Raido Kuzunoha games, as well as the general existence of stuff like Dynasty and Samurai Warriors. There's also the rumor that it was done due to Hitler's presence being a reason why the original PS1 release of Innocent Sin didn't get localized, but according to people who worked at Atlus at the time, whilst it was an arguable factor, the main reason was due to a lack of resources and staff at the time, especially when a decent chunk of the workforce had already been assigned to start localizing the game's follow-up, Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. Whatever the actual reason was, the real takeaway here is that more people need to play the earlier Persona games, if for no other reason than to spread the word that there's an RPG where you get to fight Hitler. Games advertising themselves off of shocking the general public is nothing new, whether it be Mortal Kombat's fatalities, the brutal executions featured in the Manhunt series, or just the general existence of Postal. However, sometimes if a game goes a bit too far, it can run the risk of either getting a restricted rating, effectively meaning the only platform it can be sold on is PC, like what happened with 2015's Hatred, or it could face heavy censorship, which is what happened with our next topic of interest, 1997's Carmageddon, a vehicular combat racing title for PC made by Stainless Games. The general goal being to try and rise your rank from 99th to 1st by earning points in three main ways: completing races, destroying your competitor's car, and running over innocent civilians, all of which is justified by making every driver a complete psychopath, with the actual idea for hitting pedestrians being inspired by the movie Death Race 2000. Unsurprisingly, the whole mass murdering innocent people for points thing didn't exactly go down well with certain people, leading to the game getting banned in various places, namely Brazil, the UK, Germany, and specifically the capital city of Argentina. Whilst the team felt they could live without Buenos Aires and Brazil, due to the UK and Germany being two of the biggest game markets in Europe, they had to find a way to release them there. However, Germany has historically always been averse to brutal violence in video games, and the BBFC flat out refused to certify the game unless all the blood and gore were removed. So for these regions, instead of running over people, the UK version has you kill zombies with green blood, effectively getting to keep the gore because for some reason brutally killing a monster isn't as violent as brutally killing a person, whilst the German version was toned down even further better by having you destroy robots that leave black oil spills. Even though Germany got stuck with the robots, after a 10-month-long legal battle, the BBFC were effectively pressured into certifying the original uncensored version of the game after its European publisher, Sales Curve Interactive, or SCI, submitted an appeal against the original decision to ban the game. Funnily enough though, between the release of both the zombie and uncensored versions of the game in the UK, a mysterious blood patch appeared online that undid all the censorship changes, with it being revealed years later that not only was this patch made by one of the game's original developers, but SCI were actually in on the plan the whole time, meaning that even if they lost the appeal, they still had a way of allowing people to play the game as it was originally envisioned. By the way, if the zombies and robots weren't enough for you, it turns out that in addition to Carmageddon 2 also utilizing the zombies, specifically for the PC release in certain countries as well as the console ports on PS1 and Nintendo 64, the German version replaced them with aliens for the PC release and dinosaurs for the N64 version. So just to reiterate, destroying robots is okay, obliterating a dinosaur is cool, killing aliens is alright, mutilating zombies is just great, but running over a person is just too far and could turn people into killing machines. Glad to know video games work on the same logic as children's cartoons, where you can basically be as violent as you want as long as the blood isn't red and it's not happening to people. To end things off today, I'm going to show what is, in my opinion, the most catastrophic case of a game being stripped of its artistic intent and identity. The game in question, 2001's Twisted Metal Black, which for anyone unfamiliar is the 5th entry in the Twisted Metal series, PlayStation's vehicular combat franchise whose first entry is often credited for helping to popularize the subgenre. The game's typically revolving around a titular Twisted Metal tournament in which the winner is granted one wish by the tournament's host, Calypso, with the wish in question usually operating on monkey's paw logic, where it ends up having some kind of unforeseen consequence. Within the overall history of the series, Twisted Metal Black is a bit of an odd duck, as despite widely being considered to be one of the best entries in the series by fans and critics, its attempt to serve as a series reboot after the mixed to negative reaction of Twisted Metal 3 and 4 didn't quite work out, as the next game, Twisted Metal Head-On, would effectively return to the series' original canon, albeit whilst retconning the 3rd and 4th games from the timeline, which was then followed by another reboot attempt with 2012's Twisted Metal, which would end up being, at least as of right now, the last game in the series. One of the reasons that people who have worked on the series have given as to why they felt the need to go back to the previous games was primarily due to Black's incredibly dark tone, which whilst being a point of praise to some, has also been viewed as the reason why it didn't perform as well sales-wise when compared to previous entries. Now, PlayStation is known for having some darker series, and Twisted Metal itself often plays around with dark comedy. But Twisted Metal Black was something else. Just to give an idea of what we're dealing with, some of the game's races include a Vietnam veteran who suffers from the PTSD of being tortured by being forced to eat his dead best friend to survive and now wears said best friend's stitched together skull, a former small-time boxer who wants revenge on a surgeon that mutilated his face after he lost a fight that cost the doctor a $20,000 bet, and an evangelist who wishes to rid himself of the demon that possessed and forced him to kill everyone in a church whilst he was trying to exorcise a baby. Probably the best showcase of the tone shift is what they did to the series' most iconic and popular character, Needles Kane, aka Sweet Tooth, who went from a rather straightforward, crazy clown to a full-blown serial killer with an insatiable bloodlust whose only reason for not killing Calypso on the spot was the promise that he can end the constant misery he's in from his permanently flaming scalp. And bear in mind, all of what is discussed is what actually managed to get into the final release. There was some content that seemingly went so far that Sony flat out refused to let the game come out out if they weren't changed, with one of these sequences being so horrible that years later in a making-of documentary for the series, during a discussion of one of the removed scenes, they had to partially bleep out what originally happened because of how awful it was. If after hearing all of that you think this is where I'm going with the censorship stuff, you're wrong, as despite stepping in on some aspects that they felt went a bit too far, for the most part, Sony let the team include what they wanted. For the American version, that is, as the European version was a completely different ballpark. So what do? Slightly obscure some parts of the plot, maybe even censor some of the more grotesque aspects like they would do years later for Twisted Metal 2012? No. The PAL version of Twisted Metal Black just doesn't have a story, as in all the cutscenes that play at the start, during, and end of a character's single-player route, which explain their backstory, motive, and the outcome of their wish, have been completely removed, with even flavor text in the loading screen which show the character's inner thoughts as they progress through the tournament also getting cut, meaning that outside of some bare-bones descriptions in the manual, there's just not a plot anymore. And the game has been, without exaggeration, boiled down to just being a bunch of insane people killing each other for no reason. If you're curious about if anything else was changed, they removed drivers running around screaming after their cars get destroyed, and the junkyard level was altered so that instead of shooting down a plane to unlock a secret area, it's already crashed on the ground, which was due to the unfortunate timing of a certain major tragedy that happened in the months between the US and European release. So altogether, the European version of Twisted Metal Black probably stands as the most blatant example of how censorship can completely ruin a video game, turning something that was intentionally designed to be off-putting and uncomfortable as part of an artistic expression into something no different than the mountain of games that were just dark and edgy for the sake of it that swamped the PS2 era. If there's anything to take from this, it's that while censorship can sometimes make for good laughs in how people try to cover up or alter what is very obviously happening, it can also do an immense amount of damage to an artwork's intent and vision, massively affecting how people can perceive or interpret it for years to come. Also, that PlayStation really needs to do more with some of their older series than cameos in newer games. This is definitely not a hint to the next big series I want to do.